I want to introduce you Professor Robert Steinberger Wilckens, who is one of the most prominent persons in Europe, as has been in industry and academy for decades already. Currently, he is a chair of Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Research School of Chemical Engineering, University of Birmingham. Robert is a physicist by training with a specialization in renewable energies. He co-founded engineering consultancy Planet in 1985 and has been active in the areas of hydrogen fuel cells and electric vehicles over the past 20 years. He was a program manager for the H2FC Research Center in Jülich, the largest German research campus, from 2002 to 2012, and now is a professor for fuel cell and hydrogen research at the University of Birmingham, leading a group of 50 lecturers, postdocs and PhD students. So please, Robert.
So thanks, and for this very generous introduction. Didn't realize I'm so old already. But I've actually been in this business for 20, 30 years now. Okay, so contrary to what you saw outside, but in line with what Anne showed right at the start, we've switched around the two presentations, and also Ian Steffel, who was supposed to do this talk, couldn't come after all. It's kind of holiday time and between terms in the UK, so it's a bit difficult just now. So, how do I prove? Yeah. So, what this is based on is the sort of network of all the hydrogen fuel cell research groups in the UK, which is the so-called the EPSRC. It's the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council hub, and this is led by Imperial College. And within this hub, which is partly research money and paid work, we wrote and issued these 4 white papers, which are essentially something like policy and strategy advice to the government. Not too sure how much the government listens, because the government we have just now doesn't listen to anything, and I'm not sure they can do anything or they're capable of doing anything. But then I did hear that there is some interest in, well, there's more interest in hydrogen, so maybe they did listen. We launched all this in March, which was a bad time because it was upfront to the re-election or non-re-election. Anyway, so there's a need for policy and strategy and advice to this, because as you will have realized from Bart's presentation, we've had many years, if you like, we've had close to 200 years now of research into fuel cells and electrolyzers. So first electrolyzers, then fuel cells, interestingly enough. And we're still not there. So steam engines are a little older, maybe half a century, and the dilemma we face is we might have the better technology. So as White was stating 130 years ago, which is a bit depressing, there won't be any Siemens generators anymore, and then where are we now? So essentially we're facing a phalanx of very powerful companies who don't want us. So there's lots of oil companies, all their assets are in oil wells, they're not in hydrogen. There's lots of car companies, engine companies, all their assets are in engines, they're not in fuel cells. So it's no small wonder that there's no really big political push for all these technologies. On the other hand, we know exactly from the point of view of climate change, of whatever, urban air quality, you just name it, there's nothing that speaks against this technology, and there's a lot that speaks against the technologies we have up to now. So it's a rather strange situation. We come in with a new technology. Of course, it's more expensive, and I'll be talking about that a bit later. There's massive advantages and still politics are not taking this over, and politics are not really substantially pushing this. It's slightly different at EU level because we've had about a decade of support. So starting with Commissioner Prodi, who really had some interest in this. But it's not always, doesn't always reflect in the national governments. Right, so just very few words on hydrogen and fuel cells. I'm not sure everybody's an expert here. Hydrogen is one of the most abundant elements in the universe. I think most of the universe consists of hydrogen, so it's no problem getting it. We can produce it from water. There's also other ways of producing it I'll introduce in the other talk. If you burn it or if you convert it, the only product is water. So it's essentially a zero emission fuel of heat, always on the condition that it was produced from energy sources which also don't cause emissions. So if you produce hydrogen from coal, of course you have all the CO2 emissions from the conversion. If you burn the hydrogen or if you use the hydrogen on site, you won't have emissions. So you always have to keep the full picture. If you do burn hydrogen in a combustion engine or gas turbine, you will be creating NOx. So it's not the zero emission anymore. It's zero emission if you put it through an electrochemical process, not if you put it through a combustion. The reason for that is just the temperature of combustion. So if you go above 1,100 degrees centigrade, you'll have NOx. It's just physical law of physics and chemistry. Hydrogen is safer than petrol. So it's a different sort of safety, but if you spill petrol, you get a cloud of petrol fume. This is the most explosive you can get. It won't happen with hydrogen. It can replace any sort of gas as fuel, including transport fuels. So you could convert vehicles to natural gas, and you could run these on hydrogen theoretically too, if you electrified them. But we're not only stuck with hydrogen, we can also convert the hydrogen into other fuels, like synthetic methane, so synthetic natural gas, which would be pure methane, or even synthetic diesel. It's all possible. So hydrogen could not just be an energy carrier, it's also a means to getting other places. Just a very brief look at a fuel cell. So on the right side, you can see the principle of fuel cell. Fuel cell is essentially a membrane, and the membrane has to be gas tight, has to be safely separate oxygen from hydrogen, electrically insulating, but ionically conducting. So if you turn the hydrogen into ions or you turn the oxygen into ions, depending on the type of fuel cell, these ions will be able to pass the membrane and be able to react with the other agent, the other reactant on the other side of the membrane. So this is a purely electrochemical reaction. Essentially, it's the same as if you burnt the hydrogen, but it's run in a different way. It doesn't do the detour with a thermal process. So we don't have all the problems we have with Carnot efficiency. It's all out of the question. A fuel cell could theoretically, but purely theoretically, be 100% efficient. Of course, it never will be, but it can get as close as you can get to it. So we're not limited by the Carnot efficiency. If you look at the efficiencies of thermal power plants, so nuclear power stations by definition is 33%. There's very large coal-fired power stations, lignite is about 30%. The more modern hard coal, 52%. If you have combined cycle, like a steam turbine and a gas turbine, you might get up to 60, 62%. The fuel cell can do 60 to 70% at any scale. It's a membrane-based process. It's just surface. The more power you need, the more surface you get. It has nothing to do with volume. Thermal processes are volume. So nothing can stop us from having a very small fuel cell, 1 kilowatt at 60, 65, 70% efficiency, net to the grid. It could also be a multi-megawatt unit. That's the beauty of the fuel cells. Of course, if you get very small, you'll have system losses. It won't be quite as good. So now looking at applications here, application in transport. Transport is one of the meanest parts of energy conversion. It has the lowest efficiency of all. So the overall conversion efficiency of a diesel engine is 20%, petrol engine about 18. Maybe they're pushing towards 20 and 22 now, but that's it. So that's the total efficiency of driving, say, 100 kilometers. It's not the best point of the vehicle because it will never be in that best point. And if we electrify the vehicles, of course, we get a completely different efficiency. So a battery electric vehicle would have anything like between 60 and 90%. And what we do here is we just produce the electricity for the vehicle on board from hydrogen. So with the hydrogen, we're not limited in range as we would be with a battery. A kilogram of hydrogen takes us minimum 100 kilometers. So a normal passenger car would take on board 4 kilograms of hydrogen, could go up to 600 kilometers. So it's a very similar range and very similar handling to what we have to do, and the filling of the vehicle is the same, it's 3 minutes. Which maybe is not a good thing, so essentially you just continue using cars as you would do them today, and you would wish that it would progress in a different way, but it's a way of replacing conventional vehicles and introducing local zero-emission, replacing by local zero-emission drivetrains. And there's been a study by the industry group in the joint undertaking, so Hydrogen Europe, about 5 years back, 6 years back, which sort of scoped out what will hydrogen vehicles ever be cost competitive, and they did find that if you introduce the coming Euro norms like Euro 7, 8, price of internal combustion engines will go up. If hybrid vehicles, battery vehicles will come down, hydrogen vehicles will come down, they will be about parity. And owning the vehicle and running it will be about the same price. So even today, if you take hydrogen, where you can get it essentially any hydrogen filling station, 10 euros per kilogram, it's about the same price as diesel if you run the vehicle. Of course, the vehicle price is different. So, and we have all these vehicles, so the Mirai, we have the Hyundai passenger vehicles, there'll be more to come. For the type of vehicle, they're not excessively expensive, but they're still expensive, and we have a number of, not exactly specialty vehicles, so the forklift truck to the right. Very interesting because forklift trucks are often used indoors, so in stores. If you have food stored in stores, you're not allowed to drive with any diesel engine. You have to drive with a battery vehicle. And battery vehicle is the first thing you want to get rid of, because it runs around 8 hours on a shift. If you have 3 shifts, you need at least 2 of these forklift trucks, so it's a large investment. The charging station has to be hydrogen-proof because you release some hydrogen from the batteries when you charge them. If you charge overnight, the grid fails, you have no transport in the morning, you lose a lot of money. So the fuel cell vehicle would be the exact ideal replacement for this, which can also run indoors. Trains was explained already, buses was explained already. This is real markets coming up. And here we have a sort of market pull. So Heinrich Klingenberg in Hamburg put together a list of 1,000 buses, which could be instantly ordered across Europe if the price was adequate, but if you ordered 1,000, I mean, you would get a proper price, and went around trying to find a manufacturer who would be prepared to deliver these 1,000. And Daimler just said, no, not us. And he's been running around with this list for, I think, the last nearly 10 years or so. And now we're gradually getting there, as Bart was showing. So the market pull is there. It's just the manufacturers have been very reluctant. And that is a chance for, like, the Polish manufacturer of buses of stepping into this gap. Now, heating and electricity. Here's a bit of a problem. So what you see as a blue line there is the UK electricity demand. That's across 3 years. The black steps there is transport energy, and the wavy line on top is heat, is gas. So you can see we're very preoccupied with electricity and renewable electricity, but that's not really our problem. We should be looking at heat, and we should also be looking at transport fuels. Transport fuels just as important, even more important, because we get all the pollution in urban context is transport. And as I said, the efficiency is extremely low. 85% of the transport fuels are imported. So if we have a problem, it's transport, and it's the only sector which is still growing. Everything's actually going down. Efficiency in industry is increasing. Efficiency in households is increasing. Transport is just not increasing in efficiency because engines are getting bigger, cars are getting bigger. Everybody wants an SUV. I never understood why, but okay. And it's more and more mileage. It's more kilometers driven. So this is the only sector worldwide that is still growing. And heat is about a factor of 3 higher. And nobody's really looking at this. And the UK government has now woken up a little, and they're looking at decarbonizing heat. maybe understandable because the building quality is so bad, you have to look at the heating system. Every other country in Europe is looking at improving the quality of the housing. In UK, that is a very touchy subject. So, so if we use hydrogen in fuel cells, of course, we can decarbonize heat. We could use hydrogen in a stationary fuel cell to produce heat and electricity. I'm not too fond of that. I don't think it's the most intelligent way of doing this. But we could also use natural gas or synthetic natural gas methane and essentially have zero carbon heating systems. You could also talk about district heating, things like that. It's not exactly the most favored in the UK because they have this very individual set of mind. But you get something like a transitional technology. You could work on the natural gas grid as it is now, and you can convert the natural gas grid, as I'll be showing you a bit later. And so you might use hydrogen as such, but you might also use hydrogen in the form of synthetic natural gas. Then you don't have to change the network, you don't have to change the appliances. You get higher efficiency at end of use, you spend a little more energy up front, and it's more versatile. You can also use hydrogen just for electricity generation or some sort of hybrid, because the fuel cell will always be producing electricity and heat. So electricity being the prime product, but of course, as any other thermodynamical process, there will be losses in the form of heat. So you have this combined heat and power, or you just have power as such, which is shown on the left. So there's lots of appliances nowadays. You have lots of internet-connected things, lots of data you're storing somewhere. There's nothing worse than having a data center in California and having the grid fail every other month or so. So Amazon claims if they go down for an hour, it costs them, I don't know, $10 million, $100 million. I can't quite believe that. So it's loss in sales, but then of course it's just shifted. People will order an hour later or something. But they are very much interested in having a backup. So as of now, they have to pay for diesel engines, which will be running continuously in standby, hot standby, to be able to ramp up. You need very large batteries, so why not use a fuel cell? And Bloom Energies has been able to make, to some extent, a business out of selling, or at least leasing. I think they only sell the energy nowadays. Very large combined units. So one unit is 100 kilowatts or 200 kilowatts, and they place something like 10 or 20 units. And then they have a multi-megawatt backup. And they've sold these things to Amazon, to Google, to Apple, all kinds of these companies who will be paying a bit of a premium, but also have an interest in greening their image. So that's quite a good business case. It doesn't exist in all parts of the world because not every part of the world has such a bad grid as California. And then there's something like power to gas. I'll talk about that a bit later. We can also reverse the function of a fuel cell. But a lot of the current business ideas is around data centers or other applications with similar requirements to security of electricity supply. Now, there's a couple of unique things about hydrogen infrastructure. The first thing is it's a gas, it's not electricity. So all the problems we have with balancing electricity grids with input of renewable energy are not, I'm not saying they're not existent here, but they're at a totally different scale. A gas grid is ideal because with very little fluctuation in the pressure of the gas, you have the gas grid itself as a storage. So in the normal, say, gas grid of a European country, you have about 3 days worth of storage. You don't need a cavern anywhere, it's just the gas grid as such. You pump up the pressure a little, and it just takes up the extra. So, so having hydrogen as a gas is a benefit, and you don't need this very instantaneous balancing between demand and production. So what we see here is, say, a centralized production of hydrogens. We have very large plants. On the left, we have different feedstock. I'll be expanding on that in the second talk a little. Different ways of producing the hydrogen from anything that is a hydrocarbon. So a hydrocarbon will naturally include hydrogen. So it could be electricity, it could be methane we convert to hydrogen, it could be even coal. And then we feed this into a hydrogen infrastructure. So you could have the idea you convert the natural gas infrastructure into a hydrogen infrastructure. won't be easy, but people say, okay, we converted back from town gas to natural gas. Town gas was 50% hydrogen already, so we've done this transition in the 50s and 60s, now we're going back again. It's a bit of a fantasy because, of course, in the 1960s there wasn't the number of gas appliances we have today, so it's not really the same thing. But there's people in the UK talking about this. And then we have the hydrogen distribution on the right, and then we have all the applications from industry to vehicles to households. You could also shortcut some of these things by using not a pipeline, but vehicle transport, so tankers. But you could also have the production locally. So you could use the electricity grid to transport electrical energy and locally turn this electrical energy into hydrogen with an electrolyzer. You could do this centrally, you could do it locally, and this gives you a bit of an insight into the flexibility. So hydrogen gives you a lot of flexibility. And then you go into, I think there's, no, it connects, yeah, on the right it connects, so you have all the end use on the same bus bar, if you like. And that's another way of putting this. So essentially what you're doing is you're connecting the electricity grid and the gas grid. So you're producing gas from electricity. So all the problems we have with excess energy production from windmills, all the discussion in Denmark or Germany, you can just cut short. Because if there's too much electricity in the grid, you turn it into gas. And this gas you can transport around at much less effort, much less losses than electricity. You can store it, and you can take it out of the electricity market and put it into the transport or to the heating output. So this is what you call power to gas, or this linking of energy sectors, or sector coupling, or whatever term is being used. And in the end, you could turn the hydrogen back into electricity if you wanted. It's not a very great total turnaround efficiency. It's something like 35%, so it's similar to what you have in compressed air storage today. If you improve the efficiency, you could also go up to maybe 60, 70% in total with a couple of tricks. But the main message here is you can combine the different markets of energy, and it gives you a tremendous flexibility. So if there's too much in one sector and a demand in the other, you can just shift. But I'll come back to that a bit later. Now, of course, there's a cost premium. This is sort of simulation results from University College London. Don't quite believe them because this is, it's a Markov model or times model. Essentially, I just say output equals input. So whatever you put in assumptions, you get as a result. They present this as hydrogen is not more expensive than anything else. So the case right to the right is all electric. It's the current discussion, which I think is past already, the hype's gone. We'll do everything electric. We'll have heat pumps, we'll have electrical heating, we just don't need a gas grid, all these things. And then you have this huge problem of storage and balancing. If you use a gas grid, it's different. You have an automatic storage and you have this possibility of shifting between sectors. So I think this all electric has gone again. It's cheaper because the infrastructure might be cheaper. I'm not sure it is because you have much more balancing power you need in the end, which you don't need in a gas grid. And a gas pipe is incredibly cheap, much cheaper than an electric line. So, but the message here is if you go for hydrogen, it's not more expensive in the long run. This is a view to 2030. And the other point Bart already mentioned is as you increase the numbers of units, the price comes down. So this is a double logarithmic scale, a learning curve. So you've seen this for photovoltaics, you've seen this for electronics, you've seen this for personal computers. It's always the same. And the slope differs. So in electronics and personal computers, it's like every 2 years, it's a factor of 10 or 100 or whatever. But you see, it's tremendously going down. And this is relatively realistic. As numbers go up, you can see that the cost actually does come down. There could be some surprises. So there's been some examples of companies that got stuck. So a very early company, UTC, they couldn't go below $4,000 per kilowatt, and that just got them stuck, and they went out of the market. And you can also see there's differences in, so the lines here are for South Korea and Japan. As Bart already pointed out, we are overtaking Japan just now. And so the European companies will be able also to match these curves. Again, cost calculation from University College of London. If you put a CO2 premium cost, 250 euros per kilogram of CO2, which is, per ton, sorry, kilogram would be great. Per ton of CO2, hydrogen is cheaper than any of the other options because the release of carbon dioxide gets incredibly expensive. But then, of course, 250 euros is what we've always said is necessary. But I think we're far away from that. But of course, if governments have to act on clean air and pollution issues, this might happen earlier than we think. Now, cost is an issue in itself because what is cost? Essentially, cost is what a customer wants to pay for a service. But a customer doesn't necessarily want to pay for a service what the value of the service is. Partly, they only want to pay what they're sort of offered, if you like. So typical Amazon, they offer something for free for 2 years and suddenly you pay masses of money once you've got used to this offer. So they build sort of a value. Or things are offered at low prices just to keep competition out of the market. So customer pricing is a bit tricky. And the other thing is customer pricing doesn't always, or in most cases does not mirror the actual cost, the societal cost. So for instance, if we look at energy conversion, of course we have all the cost of inner city air pollution, which is not borne by the driver of the diesel engine, or the diesel car. So the driver of the diesel car pays for the car and for the diesel. Everything else that comes from health hazards, acid rain, damages to the environment, down to climate change is essentially paid by the taxpayer. So if in Germany and Holland you have to increase the height of the seawalls, it's not the drivers of diesel cars that pay, it's the taxpayer. So essentially, as a taxpayer, as a citizen, and as a government, you bear all these costs. But it's not the cost that is allocated to the driver of the vehicle. So that's what you call externalities. And up to your own health. So you're paying with your own health if you go to Beijing and work there. Because everybody runs around with a mask, and I know a lot of people who won't take a job there because of the air quality. So you pay with your health, and in the UK they say there's about 40,000 premature deaths by bad air quality. In London, in the larger cities, in Birmingham too. So we all pay this, and it's not charged to the drivers. It's not charged to the people who run heatings and so on. And if you look at the figures, and they exist, and they've existed for a long time, so these calculations go back to 1985. They were the basis for the feed-in tariff for wind energy in Germany. So the people who fed in the wind energy got exactly this premium, which was at the time 9 cents. It changed later for photovoltaics. So if you look at transport, and this is 10 years ago, so the diesel price at that time was 85 cents or something, and it's much higher. It was double of that. So that's 7.5 euros per 100 kilometers driven with an A-class Mercedes. And at the time we looked at a very large hydrogen system, wind energy was about 15. In the meantime, the diesel price went up, the electrolyzer price came down, so that was 2 by 1. And then you add the external costs, and then you draw about even. So the external cost for 100 kilometers of diesel-driven vehicle is about 8 euros, plus another 5 for building roads, for hospitals, for policing, all that. That's all extra. This is just the cost of the diesel itself and all its emissions. There will be external costs on the hydrogen too, but this draws even. So as a state, as a government, I would have to look at what am I spending in total. So there's some private sector which is taking care of actually running the vehicles, but there's also all the sector I have to compensate in damages. So as a government, I could say, okay, I have to pay this money, so why don't I get it back from those people who've caused the trouble? Why do I charge everybody, even the pedestrians, for this service? So it's the taxes I take on board, which I can spend. Why don't I charge that to the vehicle owners? And then suddenly the picture totally changes. Then hydrogen is suddenly cheaper because it doesn't cause the damages. So probably it would give a revolution if you charge this to, on top of the diesel price or the petrol price, everybody would go through the ceiling. Why is this so expensive? Of course it's expensive because that's the total cost. It's just you're pretending it's cheaper. You've been fooled, you've been told it's cheaper so that you can be sold the petrol. Because if the petrol companies hadn't, the oil companies hadn't sort of shifted this cost to the state, they would have to charge it. So they're just exploiting the state, they're exploiting the citizens. If they were charged the proper price, and that's why we're just not progressing. Because we're looking at fantasy prices of energy, of conventional energy. And then on top of that, you take 500 billion in subsidies for oil companies worldwide every year. I mean, if we got that for our side, it would just be a totally different picture. But that's things that are never tabled. So currently we're trying to convince governments, maybe not charge this to the consumer, but at least if you're looking at funding programs, look at these total costs and then allocate the funding accordingly. There's still funding going to oil companies. I mean, what for? For polluting the air in inner cities. So that's this dilemma between internal and external costs, and that changes the picture, and it's just an educational process of getting governments to think this way. Good, just a brief look at international. So there's quite a good status of fuel cells in Japan because they had this huge market introduction program for CHP units, small CHP units. So there's over 100,000, there's close to 200,000 today. And interestingly enough, so it started with the low temperature fuel cells, now it's actually moved to the high temperature fuel cells. So the units N is producing and he's actually selling to Japan, they're actually taking over the market in Japan because they can run on natural gas directly. And Japan is an example for a country which really depends on energy imports, which has a very stringent program to get away from the energy imports, to have more efficient energy use, and a very clear strategy of where they're going across several, say, governmental periods, so financial years or programs that they call it. I think they're in the third or fourth something of this market introduction. The subsidies, I think, have been stopped now, but the program has taken off. So the price of the units has come down so low that it's actually getting close to commercial. Germany, slightly similar, also has had now more than 10 years of a very stringent program, not quite as successful. European level, you heard from Bart already. I think a success story too, and we're getting closer, and we're, as I think you mentioned already, overtaking a lot of the world. So China might be the largest competitor. They're coming up. US had a very good program, but has more or less stopped it a couple of years, unfortunately, under Barack Obama. South Korea also has some interest, but there's also been a lack there. So, but essentially, and UK, well, of course, hardly mentioned. Although it's just changing a little. But you can see there's a correlation between government support, not necessarily government support in funding, but in policy. So what you want is a framework. You want to know, okay, European Commission will install Euro 7 and 8 up to 2030. You know exactly the diesel engine will be out of the market, won't be able to cope with this. So here's the chance for the electric vehicles, including the hydrogen vehicles. If that doesn't come in place, if the Commission said, oh, well, you know, Euro 7 will be too heavy for the car industry, let's shift that by 10 years, you know exactly it won't take off. But you need this very reliable policy framework, and then you can actually start this on a commercial basis. Good, just to sum up, well, you can find these white papers on the internet. The complete documents are there. So the things hydrogen fuel cells can offer, so we get this integration of renewable energies. It's a key technology to integrate large-scale renewable energies to be able to run 100% on renewables. We can completely, well, maybe not completely eliminate, but drastically reduce urban pollution, reduce energy import, because a lot renewable energy is mostly indigenous. It's produced in the countries, on rooftops, on hilltops, and the fuel cells greatly increase the energy efficiency, the conversion efficiency. Good, that's all the contributors to this part of the study, and well, we'll take questions then towards the end. Okay, thank you.